All right, I think it's good. Okay, so we are live with our weekly Rick, Rabbi, and Rashi. This is for the parsha of Sisa, and my friend Rick and I, we learn the parsha, we think about it, we try to apply it, have some questions on it. Good old Jewish pondering and study. So this week, we're going to talk about the golden calf, the half shekel. The parsha discusses the kior, the laver, the big copper basin. And
it also makes reference to Teshuva.
And the overarching theme, I think, of all these things is the importance of Teshuva, of how repentance and return is such it's an integral part of the system. And if I told you this story, it's one of the things I quote a lot, is Rabbi Jonathan Sachs is a young student in Israel. He met with a former chief rabbi emeritus of England who had made Aliyah to Israel. And he met up, I forgot which one it was. He told him that he had been, Rabbi Sachs was learning Hasidus. He was learning Hasidism and in a Chabad yeshiva for a little bit. And this chief rabbi emeritus said that he did not come from a Hasidic background at all. He came from a very Lithuanian Talmud yeshiva background, which has its own philosophy. And this chief rabbi emeritus, former chief rabbi, said to Rabbi Sachs, you know the difference between Hasidism's view on Teshuva and the Lithuanian view on Teshuva is? In Lithuanian view of Teshuva, its part in Judaism, Teshuva being repentance, its place is by analogy of what you do when the car breaks down. Right? Your car breaks down, so you got to fix it. You got to fix it. You got to get a mechanic to fix it up and to go back again. 2, we break down. We got to fix ourselves up so we can move forward. He says in Hasidism, particularly in the Tanya, and it's funny how he knew this because he wasn't a student of it. He says, by the Hasidim, Teshuva is the gas. It's not the troubleshooting only. It's part of the machine. I think this parsha really shows you, perhaps the first time in one of the biggest times in the Torah, where God says Teshuva is the gas. So let's go to some of the questions.
So let me ask my first question about Teshuva, because I think it's interesting. When I think about Teshuva, I only think about Yom Kippur. But the truth is, we're continually turning and returning, and throughout our whole year. And maybe it's at the culmination of Yom Kippur that we actually face that. But my question is, Teshuva ushers in the messianic redemption. So if the soul needs to be redeemed because of materiality, in other words, all of these things that we think of as sort of secular, right? The secular needs that we all have. Why then is the atonement money, which we talk about like as a half shekel, right?
You give a half shekel.
Yeah, half shekel, which is money, right? I mean, why is that a cure for? Why is that a cure for materiality? That's the first part of it. And then, does this atonement practice really create equality between rich and poor, as it says in the parsha?
So I'll start with here. Although it says the smart teacher, the smart person replies in the first things first and the second thing, I'm going to go to the last thing first, just because, first of all, this is a class example of equality. There was actually 3 half shekels. And this and another one, this one going towards the silver sockets, silver base sockets of the building, and as well as a later half shekel that went towards the operating budget of the sacrifices, the buying the animals for the public offering, which was a daily occurrence, and also shot. There's special times in the day and the week when they would have public offerings on behalf of all the Jews. So those things were equal, half a coin. You had to, rich or poor, you had to come with a half a coin. So that the half shekel in particular highlights the part of us that's equal. There's parts of the soul that are equal, that are They're both children of God. What no one is greater. On the other hand, there's we know there is in the previous parshas and actually the upcoming parsha, it talks about people gave the materials for the building of the Mishkan according to their generosity and means. So there's both. There's a need to have equality because that is true at a very essential level, and for very essential things like the foundation of the temple of the Mishkan, or the public fund to bring the animal offerings. That's representing an essential equal place of every Jew. But it doesn't take away that we have unique abilities, talents, gifts that we have to use out each in our own way. So if someone has more gold, they give gold. Someone has purple wool, they give purple wool. And it's not better or worse to give gold or purple wool. You give the max of what your ability was. So that's, I think, just the basic idea. There's both. The answer is many times not A or B, it's C. There's a place for the equality because that represents a certain essential soul level. And then there's a place for the individuality, not equal, because that represents the part of the soul that manifests in the unique body. Okay.
So in today's parlance, I see it as everybody is able to fulfill the mitzvah of Sadaka. I see it in those terms, right? In today's world, I mean, we don't have the half shekel for the sacrifice or the half shekel to create the base of the Mishkan, but everybody within the community has the ability to give some tzedakah. Now, you're correct. There are those that can give more, but at least everybody participates, and I think that creates a unity within our people that I think is necessary. That we're all participatory in what we do as far as tzedakah and good deeds and mitzvot.
Yeah, absolutely. And tzedakah is a great example that even there's a Jewish law in the Code of Jewish Law, codified from the Talmud. The poorest Jew that receives public assistance has to give some charity. Mm-hmm. You might say, that's silly. He's just going to need more public assistance. Like, it's anyways coming from the public. So let this guy be exempt. He won't have to give charity. And we'll have better, cleaner books. It won't be like this sort of cyclical. You give him, he gives back to others, then he gets. And the answer is because you say there's every Jew a baseline. We're givers. Every human being is a giver. I think I happen to like words a lot. Maybe I like to talk, so I like words. But I like words, and I think when you tell people that you're a soul, you have a mission. Some people take to it more or less, but I think when you tell people that every human being, their purpose is to be a giver, some sort of giver, I think that resonates, and that's a baseline. And just about a baseline, so there was a half shekel that was given. In this case, the half shekel here refers in Parshas Sisa refers to going to the silver sockets. So we spoke in earlier parshas. There was these sort of cedar, acacia wood beams that made up the walls of the Mishkan. But at the bottom, each beam went into like a silver cinder block, whatever, type of thing, a socket of that, like that. It went into it, and it was like the bottom was like basically the bottom cubit, the bottom foot and a half was silver lined. And I was reading in some of the commentaries that you talk about equality. Let's talk about equality in Judaism, right? Moshe gives the Torah. All the Jews have to do the mitzvahs. It's not like, there's 613 mitzvahs and all the Jews are doing the mitzvahs. Wait a second. Weren't there Jews that were more spiritual and greater, like Moshe? And there was, more, illiterate, or whatever you call it, and the answer is, for the base performance of mitzvahs, all the Jews were equal. The same tefillin that Moshe put on, the simple unlettered Jew put on. And it was no different. So in action, we're all the same, at least the actionable requirements. Now, in the inner recesses of the heart and mind, there's different levels of IQ, emotional intelligence and intellectual intelligence and spiritual intelligence. And there we're different. But it's funny how the silver sockets were at the bottom, and everybody had to give equally to that to show that we're all equal in action.
And I think there's one more piece to that, and then we can move on, because I do want to get to the why we have the half shekel to cure materiality. But there's one more piece of that, and that is, I think that everybody giving, even the one who receives assistance, gives because it doesn't exclude them from the community, and that's the whole point. In other words, everybody is considered part of the community, and and then now let's move back to us wandering in the desert and in the tribes. In other words, we were all cohesive as one group of people, and even the lowliest of us who couldn't afford still would give the half shekel because it would include them as part of the community, even if they were to receive back a half shekel as some kind of aid.
Right.
It was the idea that they gave and were not excluded, because that's what I think is wrong today, is that we give welfare to folks, and then somehow we mark them with the scarlet letter that they're a welfare recipient. It's a terrible thing where I don't think we've done that. I think this part of the parsha actually helps people become part of the community without a scarlet letter.
I've showed you before the ark, that little Sadaka box that they're trying to promote, which really is, we want everybody. It's irrelevant of your means. Every kid can give a coin, and I want to make. Someone was pointed out to me a few years ago, and I grew up in the Chabad culture. I saw the Rabbi. The Rabbi was this huge world leader, and he had big ideas. He was a brilliant scholar. We're still unpacking his scholarship and teachings, and he's a great activist. He was a great humanitarian. What he did, right, and so much. Yet it's funny. He was the most accessible Jewish leader in history. He made himself accessible via in the 50s, 60s, and 70s via the private audience, the yechidus. And then when he had a heart attack and they had to limit that, in the 80s, it picked up the giving the dollars. You'd meet him, you can long lines and pass by for a few seconds to receive a blessing or get a piece of advice and get it. He'd always give $1. And his mechanism, before that, he'd give children coins to give to charity. And it's so interesting. The meeting of the person and the Rebbe was always, he felt the most important mechanism, it has to be, even if it's symbolic, was in a framework of charity. Here's $1, you be my messenger to give to somebody else. I give to you and you help somebody else. He made his whole, he framed everything in a concept of empowering people to be givers. And it's very interesting. Someone pointed out to me, I never thought of it like that, but it's true. That's the way, right. That was the framework. It wasn't like, come, I'm going to teach you, I'll give you advice, and then, wonderful. It was, if two Jews meet, it has to benefit a third party. And that's why, the idea of kids giving coins to charity is so important from a little age. You're always giving kids Sadaka, because they get trained that money is nothing of itself other than an agent. It's an agent. Money is it's a currency to do stuff with. And when you tell them it's to do an agent for good, that becomes embedded in them.
Right.
I think that's why, today it's we talked a little bit before about so much knowledge, so you have to sort of sometimes get to the most quintessential point in order to make sense from all the chaos. And I think the Rebbe felt that in the world, not just to the Jewish world, but to the non-Jewish world, the most important mitzvah to sort of recalibrate our values of goodness and truth is going to be through making people realize they are givers, they are charity, they can give charity, even if it's a tiny bit.
Yes, and that's truly where my heart is. So I truly understand the idea of giving, and I think most people do understand that, because we see it in our own community. Rochester specifically is a very unique community.
So yeah, very special.
Okay, so let's see.
Finish your question about.
Let's see if we can get to the answer.
Right. I'm sorry for deflecting questions.
We go on forever about talking about Sadaka.
So why? So I think there's a misnomer.
Yeah.
Of Judaism is not a spiritual goal; it's a divine goal, and there's a big difference between spirituality and divine. God is the creator of the spirit and of the body. Neither of them is closer. Now, spirit is we call heaven in the Jewish terms the world of truth, because the soul outside the shell of the world and the body only sees truth. So, but it doesn't mean that the soul is more of the point than the body. On the contrary, the Medrash says the whole point of the world is the soul to envelop the body and together to transform the physical world to be a dwelling for God. So with that in mind, that the goal is not to escape materialism, but it's to sublimate, to repurpose materialism to be in line with the spiritual oneness.
Okay.
It makes sense that you want to give money is going to be perhaps the greatest mitzvah. And this is not my guess. This is the Jerusalem Talmud, which is not the Babylonian Talmud. It was a little earlier. But the Jerusalem Talmud says that whenever it refers to mitzvah in a stam, in an unspecified mitzvah, there's 613 mitzvahs. But if it says mitzvah, it refers to tzedakah. Because the Tanya tells us, in a sense, tzedakah, giving your money, which you earn with your blood, sweat, and tears, is the greatest transformative agency of bodily transformation. When I pray, how much of my body am I bringing there? Some, my mind, let's say, my heart. When I put on tefillin, I use my arm. But if the goal is a radical goal to transform the physical world and man's psyche to be aligned with God's will and brotherhood and harmony, it's going to be an inside job. You're going to take the soul goes to the body. It works hard like crazy to have survival stuff called money. And then when you then say, I'm going to give that money to charity, it's not just $1 or $100 you give to charity. It's the blood, sweat, and tears. Your whole being that had to go make the money is being given over to God.
It's sort of a selfless act, right? I mean, you do it because
it's a transformative act. It's a repurposing, transformative act.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. I can agree with that. Okay. Well,
so the goal is not escape materialism. The goal is repurposing materialism. And what better way to do that than by giving the half shekel, or in this day, charity?
Okay. So my next question actually deals with the emphasis on the incense, which they talk about, how to prepare it, the recipe, the whole thing. They go into such detail. But they say the recipe must include the galbanum. Is that what it's called?
Yeah. Chelbana in Hebrew, the galbanum, I think, I'm not sure what it's pronounced. Galbanum in
which is really kind of a strange and pungent smell. It's really not it doesn't sound very pleasing, but they use it to complete the incense recipe. So my question is, first of all, why does God admonish not to exclude the sinner from participating in public prayer with the righteous? I'm wondering about that.
Yeah.
And it said that exclusion would prove prayer was ineffectual. How do we know that?
So the incense represented at all the services in the temple. One of the highlights of just an example of how important the incense was. Incense took place twice a day, morning and afternoon. But the incense also was one of the highlights of the Yom Kippur service. He'd bring the service, I think he'd bring the pan into the Holy of Holies and walk out. But my point is, incense was a very big deal. And you can see this in the sense of scent versus scent. And of all these 5 senses, they say that smelling is the most metaphysical. Let's think. Sight, you're seeing physical. Touch, taste, and hearing. Smell, I didn't research it too much, but it's in a sense it's the most metaphysical. It's the less, maybe the others are more needed for the human being, and smell is kind of like a bonus. Whatever, be it as it may. Incense it represents the essential connection of the person and God. Right? Because it's a cloud. It's not even physical. It's not like a sacrifice of an animal and you meat and you put the meat on the altar. It's just smell. It's just sort of like, cloud. It's representing a very spiritual type of idea, which is that essential bond that we have that is never sullied between us and God, even when we sin.
So is incense sort of an otherworldly?
Yes, good way, great. Yeah. Incense is an other world, which is funny how in the world today, even in Far East, incense is like this big spiritual rite because it seems to like elevate us in a way, as well as also it's otherworldly. Good word. So back to your question, why was there a foul smelling spice in of itself? I'm guessing when it blended, it kind of it wasn't as bad. But it's interesting. Besides the foul smelling, there's another one of the ingredients. There's 11 ingredients. One of them was galbanum, which was foul smelling. Others were more nice smelling, or fragrant. There was also a musk. There was a gland of a non-kosher animal from India that was part of it. So it's funny, like this holy, you need some according to some opinions, you need this like non-kosher ingredient. Well, it's not consumption, so it's still like, come on.
I understand what you're saying.
Still, it's kind of like, why would you like want it to be in the Holy of Holies, something that's foul smelling and even another ingredient that's not kosher? Because again, this is representing a very, very deep idea that goes beyond behavior or beyond the external interface. It's the intrinsic connection of the soul and God. That answers your other question of why sinners had to be included in prayer. It says that any congregation that doesn't have sinners among them, it won't be answered. You have to have sinners among them in order to be a full congregation for your prayers to get answered, which seems like, wait a second, if you take all everybody's scorecard, this guy's got a negative scorecard, get him out. It's just going to make our average go lower. But what is really Teshuva, and we'll learn later, we'll touch on that also, but Teshuva is not really repentance. It's not like, oh God, we beg you to forgive us, and okay, you're good enough, I'll let you go. It's returning to that essential state of being, which the incense represented, the return to the essential state of being, the otherworldly connection of the soul and God that is never sullied. So to show that we don't care, not only do we not care, but we want to show that every Jew, irrespective of their behavior, has that essential pintaliyid, that bond. And if you hide them and you don't include them, you're making a message. We really want the outer bond. I said, no. We're not allowing you to satisfy with an outer bond. We're forcing you to acknowledge and to probe and collectively get to the inner bond, because we're not, so that's why you had to have the sinner.
So I see it as sort of the sinner or the pungent odor is sort of a catalyst that brings us to a higher level, right? It's, in other words, it tends
That's
to.
That's one way of looking at it. Yeah.
Mix it.
I would say, though, it's not, you see, a catalyst, and that's definitely true. I think Hasidism, the Rabbi would always go even deeper and say, this is not just a means to an end. You have to say the sinner is an end of himself.
Mm-hmm.
What could be an advantage of a sinner in of himself? As a catalyst, that makes sense. But how could it be? So you might say, like along those lines, is that, when you have children, someone asked the Rebbe once in private audience, how could you invite all the irreligious and be so, so engaging and loving, they're sinners, So he could have answered many ways, but he came like this: as when a person has children, right? He loves all his children, right? Let's say the real problem child that really is lacking in behavior and the etiquette of the family. What's the response? You have to love them even more. Why do you have to love them even more? Not just as a catalyst to get them back, but because you want to show them, I'm not fazed by your outer behavior. Yeah, I don't like it, and I hope you change. But I'm your parent. I love you so much. It goes beyond your behavior, and that's that essential bond to bring people back when they feel seen and loved, irrespective of their insecurities and their problems. That's what people need. So Hashem is saying, I want to show the Jews I love them. The sinner represents God's love for that problem child, which is such a deep love.
I like that actually a lot. We could use a lot more of that in today's world.
Look, I think neuroscience is mirroring a lot of the, talk about the positivity bias, the book.
Yes. Well,
a lot of it's mirroring that.
We talked about that earlier, that I'm back looking at.
I think that's just, it's becoming like it's converging, it's the tough love of the past 2 generations. We know it doesn't work. We know just psychologically it has its limitations, and we need to include and love the sinner, not just because as a catalyst, but because it brings out our essential being when we can love someone irrespective of their behavior. Very hard, easier said than done.
You have to put honey on the corner of that page of the child that is the most difficult, so they know your love is sweet. I mean, I think that's what it's about.
So that was a little about the incense. I want to mention one more interesting point. I learned something when I was in California last Shabbos. So I was.
By the way, Mazal Tov.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a good time had by all. Sure. I read a talk. I was told I had to prepare something in case I needed to speak. I didn't have to speak in the end, which was fine with me, but it gave me the push to prepare. So I actually read one of the final public addresses of the Rabbi in 1992, and there was a fascinating one about the incense. And in very short, we mention every day in the morning prayers, there's something called preliminary prayers. And before Shachris, there's preliminary prayers called the Karbanos. We mention the biblical passages of the sacrifices and the incense among them that we can't do today, minus the temple, but we learn about them, and that's sort of in place. Our speaking about it is in place. Our speaking and verbalizing and studying it is in place of whatever spiritual energy that was accomplished by those temple rites. So he was talking about, it's interesting, it talks in the, every morning, I say this, I don't really pay attention all the time, but we talk about the incense every morning. And the incense is always mentioned, there's the daily incense and the Yom Kippur incense. Now for the daily, we shouldn't really talking about the daily incense, but we mention Yom Kippur incense sort of in passing we stick it in there. And the question is why? Like, it's not Yom Kippur today. Today's just a regular day. Why are you sticking in the Yom Kippur part? Why the sages in these passages include the part of Yom Kippur? And the answer is that there's sort of like this 2 degrees of separation, that the daily incense, albeit not as big a deal, is a micro representation of the highest service of the Yom Kippur service, which was the Yom Kippur incense, which before I told you the incense symbolically represents this essential being of the soul. So the way, it was a long transcript, I was trying to get it, but the way I got it, the way I understood it is that every day today is a mundane, boring day. But it's not, because if we believe God is giving us this day, today's the first day, and really the only day of your life that matters today. Right. So for today, there's a certain essentiality of today, almost like Yom Kippur, or it draws from Yom Kippur. So it's just kind of like, to me, I mean, I've developed the thought a little more, but we talk about the incense, it's not just it's that 2 degrees of separation, that 1 degree of separation of our boring every day, and realizing how integral this is to God. In a sense, Yom Kippur is like the brain, and every day is like the nervous system that comes out from the brain, but it's all connected to the brain.
And every day, obviously the incense sort of builds towards that Yom Kippur experience. And I think what it does is you do sort of I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, but sort of a mundane incense, right, for daily, but trying to know that it's a special day, but at the same time, always keeping in mind by repeating about Yom Kippur, that Yom Kippur is out there for us. Then the idea of Yom Kippur and the Teshuva and the return and that kind of. So that's a great concept.
And according to
the value of the incense.
And according to Hasidism, that Yom Kippur, the reason it's so powerful is not because we turn over a new leaf. It's that we're returning to our essential self. Mm-hmm. Because there's 5 levels of the soul. The 5th one is the most essential, and Yom Kippur is open for the taking. So when we go to the rest of the year, where we're more concerned or more conscious of the outer four levels of the soul, the more, biological life, the emotional life, the intellectual life, but not that essential, intrinsic, unbreakable bond part, we have to remind ourselves that it's always there. Even if our army mission today is to engage in the mundane, to go have a day at the office or whatever, it's not like it's sort of like small potatoes. Somehow this is so central to the big picture.
Yeah. Great answer, Rabbi. I like it.
And God's always giving us the power to be successful in every mundane day. That's another thing. You have, same way Yom Kippur, we feel that boost. It's there. It might be might be subconscious, but the boost is there because it's there always.
And if it's predetermined, obviously it's okay.
Well, that's another question. Predeterminism versus free choice.
I know. Well, we should get to that one of these days. That would be a very fascinating discussion. I'm not so sure I'm totally on board with predetermination, but that's for another day for discussion. So let me start with another question. So we're instructed to protect or observe. Okay, I think those are the words that are basically in the Hebrew. To protect or observe the Sabbath, as well as make the Sabbath. Okay, so there's a difference. There's a difference between making the Sabbath and protecting and observing the Sabbath. Why the distinction? And what level of participation fulfills this commandment? Does playing baseball with your children count, or is it only those who study and worship that fulfill this?
So just looking at the note here. So the idea of protect, the meanings of observe is to protect, or making versus protecting the Shabbos. The Shabbos is also an otherworldly experience, as the whole world is elevated to a being state, not a doing state. Incidentally, in the parsha after Sisa Vayakel, it's going to talk about how we know what the definition of resting is, and it says we know the definition of resting. How do the rabbis know? It's from the juxtaposition. It's one of the exposition rules that the rabbis had back to Moses, is that juxtaposition of certain ideas are meant to learn from one another. And the reason in the parsha Vayakel, it mentions that Hashem gave them the command of keeping Shabbos, and it's right next to the building of the Mishkan. It's to tell you that whatever was needed to build the Mishkan, the construction process, going back to even the planting materials, the supply chain, whatever's needed for the supply chain and for the building part, all those things are juxtaposed to the command of doing Shabbos. And Hashem saying that even if the building the temple is so important, you can never allow the building, you have to stop everything of the temple in order to do the Shabbos. That's why it's juxtaposed. And we also learn from that what the definition of labor is. Labor is not labor as in necessarily like sweating. It's labor in the sense of creative process. Man's able to create and manipulate nature to make an end result. And there's 39 labors, archetypical labors. So the protecting of Shabbos is we don't get in the way. Maybe you'll get caught up with Shabbos about the do's and don'ts, like, oh, don't do this, don't do that. If we're telling you there's a certain essential state of being that is for the taking on Shabbos, we're just trying to protect ourselves not to become distracted like we are the rest of the week with all the other good stuff or whatever stuff we have to do. Because Shabbos is different. Shabbos is a certain state of being. And we know today more than ever, we see today more than ever with smartphones why Shabbos is so important, because we are suffering as a society with overdoing or overstimulated or over consuming. And we have to cut that out to some degree in order so we can be. And Shabbos is that antidote,
So you can define, I mean, I asked the question whether playing baseball with your children is helping to observe the Shabbos. And I think if you're separating the day out as something that's different than the other six, right? If you define it in your mind as, and maybe you pray and maybe you study, but maybe you just spend the day with your children on a picnic bench, right? Or something like, so you wouldn't normally do that every week. To me, at least my own personal perspective of it is that it's kind of, don't do the things you normally do. Do something that's different, and that's how you honor it.
Look, there's definitely, I hear that. And there's, I think the spirit of that is good. I mean, Jewish law adds to that. One detail is that it's not only change of routine and relaxation, it's change of routine and relaxation in order to help us and our children touch a deeper part of us. So I think it's part of the equation, but we want to make sure the idea of the laws of Shabbos is to make sure that we're doing that, not just in a sort of open-ended way, but in a more focused way to help us bring out tremendous deep powers of us. Part of it is a relaxation, but I don't think that's the primary goal of the Shabbos. People think the Shabbos is about, if Shabbos is relaxation, the more pina coladas and hammocks, the better. Every Orthodox home would have, a bar and a hammock for the Shabbos. But it's not. It's. I'll tell you a great story, and this is, I think, our two perspectives here. I'll tell you where I come from. So the fourth Chabad Rebbe had a student. And when I say student, it was more like, like a master-student relationship, sensei, And he asked that Rebbe, his name is Rabbi Shmuel of Lubavitch, what should I learn for the next year? What should I focus on in my studies? And he said, A, B, and C, whatever it was. So this student said, but I really want to learn X, Y, and Z, whatever other area. So I'm asking you, but I'm telling you, that's not as much of my passion. So that Rebbe said, nonetheless, I still really strongly advise you should focus for the next year in A, B, and C area of study. But the student counter says, isn't it a dictum of the Talmud that you should study where your heart desires? The makom shelibo chafetz. You should learn what your heart desires, because obviously you learn with more excitement. So the Rebbe answers something which is a very deep answer that validates but also clarifies. Says, yes, you have to learn where your heart desires, but you have to be guided to know what you should want. You have to know what to desire.
That's interesting. So,
in a modern Western world of free rights, free rights is the holy grail of everything. Everybody can do what they want, and they're the rights to do that. Judaism says, while there's a lot of freedom, there's a lot of obligation, but it's not this controlling type out. The goal is not control or controlling the person, but it's saying that this is your spiritual prescription to help you bring out the most powerful parts of yourself. And we all know ourselves, right? The challenge of wealth is no less a challenge than poverty. There's so much pitfalls, psychological, emotional, people become a mess.
Ethical.
There's so many challenges that wealth brings that poverty doesn't have. Poverty has its own challenges, and we don't pray for poverty. We pray God should give us blessing, but it doesn't take away the challenge that comes with the wealth. So the free society comes with a lot of real challenges that we have to be aware of, and this idea that Judaism is telling you should have the best day of rest, but you should do it in the way that is best. And the Torah is going to tell the best for your soul and bring out those essential state of being. So that's in the rubric of protecting the Shabbos. Protect the Shabbos that you don't get in the way. And the Torah gives you a prescription how to do that. On the other hand, there's the making the Shabbos. There is the idea which really left up to you. Within the framework of Jewish law of Shabbos, there's a lot of leeway. How are you going to, play Shabbos? There's many things you can do, and there's many ways you could spend the leisure time of Shabbos. And that way you do, and there's many ways you could enhance Shabbos. That's the way we add to Shabbos. We make it. We actually add to it. So you got to be careful to protect our choices, but then also be very creative in maximizing those choices.
So the protection of it actually informs the making of it.
Yes, exactly. I think this is such an important idea because young people today, and you have to run away to find yourself. I'll go to this, I'll travel, I'll do this, I'll go. Today, what is it? You move to Boston, Denver, New York. That's like the formula for finding yourself. You do a little stint in India if you're Israeli. Whatever the case is, you have to run. So Judaism says, let's cut. Judaism tells us, I'm going to cut to the chase of what you don't have to go you don't have to learn everything the hard way. The Torah is giving us a prescription it gives us a lot of leeway for creativity, but it also gives a prescription for the boundaries of the protection. So Shabbos is one example,
It's interesting. I never thought about it in those terms of the protection, the boundaries versus the free will that you actually have and how you make it.
And I was in South Africa earlier this year for my nephew's wedding in Johannesburg. And I was only there for less than a week. But I got a little bit to talk with some of, I have an old friend who married a South African and became a doctor there. So he was there for the past 13 years and he's talking his observations from Jersey. He's also from Jersey. And he told me a fascinating thing that there's a very strong, we know there's a strong South African Jewish community, but a lot of the young people, they marry, they marry Jewish and they set up Jewish homes very quickly, relatively quickly, whatever the percentage was. And he says, one of the reasons he thinks is that the university system in South Africa is you don't move away from home. A little bit, he says now more, but for the past you stayed at home and you went to university for the 4 to 10 years, whatever you're doing. But that means that on Friday nights, you go with your parents to temple, to synagogue, and you're doing Shabbos, you're doing Friday night dinner every week. And when you're now, you're doing that and you're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 24, 25, 24, 25, whatever to 30, you're getting married, you're much more grounded, let me have, 10, let me try 5 relationships and trial and error. You're a lot more guided into the to building a home.
Now that is interesting. I didn't know that about the South African Jewish community.
I didn't. I can confirm with the local, our local Rochester expat.
We can talk to Dr. Wayne Leibschitz and ask him, or Jackie, right? We can speak to that.
I spoke to Jackie about it already. She was waxing nostalgic. So
I'm sure she was. But it's interesting that their level of intermarriage is probably significantly less.
Yeah, and there's other reasons as well. Probably there's a lot of other reasons. It's not. I don't think it's only that, but a close community. America, that rugged individualism of America, is a double-edged sword. It has good, a lot of good, and it has pitfalls we got to be careful of.
Well, it creates a lot of creativity, our rugged individualism in this country, but sometimes it's without boundaries, and sometimes it goes astray in a direction that probably isn't good. So again, we should protect that at the same time while we make it.
Exactly.
And maybe on the rugged individualism, we should be doing the same.
We'll leave that to the pundits.
That's right. We're not the politicians in life. You're right. Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, let's go on. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I got to find the best one that I like now. I think Let's see if I can find.
Let's go to the golden calf. Something about that, because I think that's wants to hear about that.
Did I ask a question about the gold? See, I thought the golden calf was so sort of normal. You know, I mean, everybody asks questions.
Everybody knows about the golden calf.
Everybody knows about the golden. Okay, so here's a question. All right, I'll give you a question about the golden calf. So when Moses comes down from the mountain, after, by the way, the Jews can't count. We're all accountants, but we can't count. We think 39 days is 40.
Well, to be fair, they didn't. They did count correctly. They misunderstood when the count started.
Okay.
Moshe went up on a morning and he said, count 40 days. And they thought, okay, that's one day. No, that's a half a day. Right. So it has to be a full 24-hour period, which in Judaism starts by night. So that's our next.
So let me ask you the question. So here's the question. He comes down with the first set of tablets, right? And the tablets are written all the way through. I mean, it's, it's the word of God. It's there. He brings it down. He comes down and he sees the golden calf in front of him. And is it in anger or in compassion that he actually throws the tablets down on the ground and breaks them? Is he showing anger because he's sad that they have created this calf? Or is he showing compassion that they shouldn't know that within the tablets it says that thou shalt not commit idolatry, right? There's no idolatry in it. Right. So which of those is Moses?
So if you read the verse literally, flat out, it says that Moshe saw the calf and the dancing around it. He became indignant. He got angry. And he then broke the tablets. So that's simple. And by the way, as we know, we always need the commentaries from the thousands of years from the Talmud, starting with the Talmud and the Medrash, but Rashi being, the one that sort of codified it in a readable way. Anger in general is never a good thing. Anger is one of the traits that Maimonides writes is you have to stay extremely away from it. Like in Judaism, we're about moderation for the most part. Don't be too spendthrift. Don't be too generous. Like don't be generous to a fault, but don't be stingy to a fault. Be somewhere in the middle. But there's exceptions. One of them is pride. You have to be extremely away, like anti-pride. Don't be. When I say pride, I mean arrogant. You have to be far away from that. Extremely stay away from that.
Right. Anger, be humble.
Right. Be the opposite extreme, humble. Right. And anger is to stay far away. So anger is a bad thing. Yet we see God commends Moshe on his breaking the tablets. But how could doing something out of anger be commendable? Which, this is like many things, should make us wonder what's going on here and have to dig deeper. So the fact that God commended Moshe on anger, vis-a-vis, when he was angry, later by the splitting the rock, God didn't look favorably on that, right? When he hit the rock. So but this is God's commanding. So there's obviously a difference of anger. And actually, I got this from reading Jonathan Sachs's book, the life-changing ideas. There's on this essay for the Sisa. It says when let's say your child does something horrible, detestable. What's the proper reaction? He says you're not allowed to be angry, but you have to actually be calm and know this is what God wants. He wants you to help your child learn, but you don't let your emotions get out of control. You're actually calm, but you feign anger, you feign indignance, or you put on composed indignance. So it's not out of control. I'm sorry, how could you, smash the car, whatever, or, do that horrible thing to a kid? You have to take it for what it is. Inside, you're all calm because you're doing God's will to educate your child. But you could you can feign or outwardly display anger and indignance. But as long as it's not really getting out of control inside.
So is the idea that you're supposed to, I don't mean this in a bad way, but there's a play act so that the person receiving the message thinks that you
knows how this is serious, but you're not. You're really in control of yourself at that point.
Right, but your anger is really not. It's really compassion inside, is what you're saying.
Absolutely, it's absolutely because all teaching begins with compassion, empathy, and understanding. So there's depth. So Moshe had compassion. Just to give you Rashi's quote from the Talmud, the Medrash, he says, "It's who led the golden calf? It was the Egyptian converts that joined the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, those that last minute joined the Jews." And they were the ones who were most, adept at idolatry, and they led them in this golden calf thing. I mean, many Jews were complicit, but they led it. So it says that it's analogous to a king had a fiance, and the king went away for some royal matters, and his fiance with the maidservants, whatever the all have more less royal obligation, and they do more promiscuous things. They did more promiscuous things. It got out that the maidservant house did promiscuous things, and who was there at the time? The fiance. So maybe she did promiscuous things also, which is that's death penalty stuff. So the representative of the fiance, in Hebrew back then it was a concept called the bride had a representative and the groom had a representative, called a shushvin. Not shin, but a shushvin. Shushvin saw what's going on. He ripped up the engagement contract. So when the king came and got angry at this news of his fiance was part of the promiscuous party, he said, you weren't married, you weren't even engaged. The contract was null and void. You can't prove that she was really tethered to you. And the king there had to do more investigation. He didn't just chop off her head, did more investigation, saw that she was actually innocent. It wasn't her. It was ill repute, but it wasn't actually her. And they reconciled and they got married. So after that, the king, the representative, the shushvin, says, "Okay, now I want to." Before they got married, let's rewrite the marriage contract. So the king tells Moshe, the king tells the representative, "You ripped it, you get the new paper, and then I'll sign it." And so that's the simple thing here is that when Moshe broke the tablets, it was actually one of the greatest, not just compassionate acts. It was something that Moshe had to make a decision of two great loves of his life. One being the Torah. Moshe was the embodiment of Torah. He was literally the Torah giver. He was so like his identity was Torah. And two, Moshe
Love the people.
He loved the people. And he said, if I have to choose, I'm going to break the Torah to save the people. And in this case, and God at the end said, Yasher Kayach, good job. But now you have to go rewrite it. Sorry, you have to go hew it again from the ground, and I will then engrave upon it.
But it's rewritten in a way that's different than the first offer.
That's sort of what this represents. That Moshe, first of all, it's rewritten in a way that it's almost the same, but what's rewritten is, I think it actually was the same. But
was it the same? I thought it was the same. Okay.
I think the difference, though, was that more accompaniments of what we have of the Medrash, more like explanations came to Moshe at the giving of this second tablets. And this really represents what the Torah is now, a book of compassion and of Teshuva, because it was rewritten in that way. It's really fused with the human being's experience. Before it was like otherworldly, and people just they couldn't assimilate it in a way they can get it. It was all from God. God gave the tablets and wrote on it. Now God's saying, now it's going to be fused. You give the tablets, I'm going to write on it, and now it's a book of Teshuva, of oneness, of the human and God, and of course compassion. So
But we've come full circle. We're back to Teshuva. And I'm sorry that we didn't.
Teshuva's the gas. Remember, Teshuva's going to mean everything. It's going to mean everything.
I'm sorry we didn't make it before Shabbat, but we made it at least
we
today.
did Teshuva. We did Teshuva. It's never too late.
Teshuva. That's right. We did Teshuva. And I'll say Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov to everybody. And we're going to hopefully do it earlier this upcoming week's parsha.
Yeah, we'll have it before Shabbat.
Yeah, Mitzvah Shem. God willing.
Okay. All right. Be well.
All the best.